Imagine stepping into a time capsule where steel was shaped not only for transportation, but as a symbol of authority, where every curve carried whispers of a forgotten past, and where a once grand machine stood abandoned in silence, its paint dulled, its chrome tarnished, its leather cracked from decades of neglect. Picture the dust of half a century gathering across its body, like a veil over a story that few remember, but many would find irresistible if they only knew it existed. The air is heavy with the scent of old oil and fading upholstery, and beneath the grime lies the promise of prestige reborn. This isn't just about restoring a machine. It's about unlocking an entire chapter of history that once defined status, influence, and aspiration in an era shrouded by secrecy. We'll journey through its forgotten origins, explore the battles fought to bring it back, and discover why it still matters today. If you're ready to dive deep into a story of resurrection and legacy, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and comment below what vehicle you'd like us to uncover next. The 1953 GAZ-18 Zim emerges at the center of our journey, a Soviet-era luxury sedan that was both a statement of authority and an experiment in prestige during a time when automobiles were far more than just tools of mobility. This car was designed not for the everyday citizen, but for those who carried weight in the corridors of government and diplomacy. At its core, the Zim was an attempt to prove that a society best known for utilitarian machines could also produce something that rivaled Western luxury. Yet what it achieved and what it represented were more complex than anyone expected. From its oversized proportions to its gleaming chrome, it looked the part of a limousine, but its story reveals tension between ambition and reality. To understand how this car became both iconic and forgotten, we must step back into the mindset of post-war engineering and the world it was created to impress. And so begins the unraveling of its tale. Microstory, the ceremony of arrival. Imagine a foreign diplomat arriving in Moscow in the early 1950s. Instead of being ushered into a modest sedan, they were met with the imposing silhouette of the GAZ-18 Zim. Its broad stance, glittering trim, and cavernous cabin weren't just about luxury. They were signals of state power, designed to impress at first sight. For the passengers inside, the experience was less about comfort and more about symbolism. Every inch of leather, every polished detail was calculated to convey authority. Yet for those who rode in it daily, the car was both a privilege and a burden, a reminder that luxury could be manufactured, but not always perfected. This duality, prestige on display, imperfections under the surface, became the heart of the Zim's reputation. Microstory, building against the odds, producing. The GAZ-18 Zim in 1953 meant working with limited resources in a country still recovering from the devastation of war. Engineers faced shortages of high-quality steel, inconsistent part supply, and pressure from leadership to deliver quickly. The result was a vehicle that looked grand but often felt fragile. Owners and chauffeurs would recount mechanical quirks, ill-fitting trim, and a constant need for adjustment. Yet despite these shortcomings, the Zim carried an aura of importance, as though the flaws themselves were tolerated because the car was meant to project more than it could perform. The workers who built it weren't creating a perfect machine, they were sculpting an illusion. Context digest, a sedan, unlike the rest. In 1953, most cars produced in the Soviet Union were utilitarian, stripped down, and purely functional. Trucks moved goods, small sedans transported workers, and military vehicles reinforced the image of a nation in control. The GAZ-18 Zim, by contrast, was a statement piece. It was not mass-produced for the average family. It was hand-assembled in relatively small numbers for officials, ambassadors, and symbolic appearances. This exclusivity made it both a prized possession and a rare sight. For many citizens, catching a glimpse of one rolling through a city street was less about admiration and more about recognition. Someone powerful was inside. Microstory, the chauffeur's burden. Behind the wheel of the GAZ-18 Zim was often a professional driver tasked with managing not just the car, but also the perception it carried. These chauffeurs knew the quirks of the machine better than anyone. The heavy steering, the underpowered engine struggling with its own weight, the constant balancing act between smooth rides and mechanical frustrations. Their role wasn't only to transport officials, but to maintain the illusion of effortless motion. Many came to respect the car for what it was, even as they quietly cursed its flaws. In their hands, the Zim was less a luxury toy and more a daily test of skill and patience. Context digest, designed for stagecraft. Unlike its utilitarian cousins, the GAZ-18 Zim was built with theater in mind. Its wide bench seats, plush upholstery, and towering profile were tailored for moments of public spectacle. When a delegation stepped out of one, cameras captured authority framed in chrome. But away from ceremonies, these sedans demanded constant upkeep to keep the shine alive. Rust would creep in, trim would loosen, and engines would groan under strain. The contradiction was unavoidable. A vehicle meant to symbolize power was always one breakdown away from embarrassment. Reflection bridge. The Gaz 18 Zim was not simply an automobile, but a performance. A rolling play where flaws had to be hidden behind grandeur. To grasp how this balancing act shaped its legacy, we must look deeper into how it was received, maintained, and eventually abandoned. Micro-story: the fall into obscurity. As newer models emerged and the state evolved its symbols, the once proud Gaz 18 Zim began to fade from relevance. Many were relegated to secondary duties, stripped of their luster, or left to decay in government lots. Without a strong civilian market to absorb them, most were scrapped or forgotten. A handful trickled into private hands, where enthusiasts faced the monumental task of keeping them alive with little support or spare parts. In time, the Zim became less a status symbol and more a relic, remembered only by those who once saw it command the streets. Context digest: a collector's rarity. Today, surviving Gaz 18 Zims are vanishingly rare, with only a small number preserved in museums or in the hands of dedicated restorers. Their scarcity has elevated them from overlooked relics to valuable historical artifacts. Unlike cars that evolved into long-running consumer lines, the Zim's brief and exclusive run means it holds a special place for those fascinated by the tension between image and reality in automotive history. For collectors, finding one in any condition is less about driving pleasure and more about curating a symbol of an era. Reflection bridge. What began as a symbol of prestige has transformed into an object of fascination, not for what it achieved, but for what it reveals about the time and place it was created. To explore why restoration of the Gaz 18 Zim carries such weight today, we must examine the challenges and triumphs that come with reviving this forgotten luxury sedan. The 1953 Gaz 18 Zim takes on new meaning when we shift from its history of symbolism to the gritty reality of restoration, where every nut and bolt tells a story about how this machine was built and how it can be reborn. Enthusiasts who dare to bring a Zim back to life face hurdles far beyond those encountered with more common classics. The bodywork is often ravaged by rust, the trim nearly impossible to replace, and the mechanical systems a labyrinth of outdated technology. Yet, for those determined to save one, the project becomes not just about reviving a car, but about reconstructing a vanished world. Every choice, whether to replicate original flaws or modernize for function, becomes a philosophical debate about authenticity and legacy. To appreciate the stakes, we need to step into the workshop, micro-story, the search for parts. Imagine opening the hood of a Gaz 18 Zim and realizing that half the components are either missing or unusable. Unlike mainstream classics, there is no catalog to order replacements from, no swap meets filled with vendors. Restorers scour old warehouses, barter with collectors in distant regions, or fabricate parts entirely from scratch. It's not unusual for a project to stall for months while a single piece is hunted down. Each component recovered feels like a small victory, not just over scarcity, but over time itself. The persistence required to piece a Zim together makes it a restoration challenge unlike almost any other. Micro-story: the body as a battlefield. The Zim's large frame was striking in its day, but decades of neglect have turned many into shells of rust. Restorers often find themselves cutting out entire panels, welding replacements, and hand-forming curves to replicate the car's distinctive lines. Chrome trim, once a symbol of power, is often pitted beyond repair and must be either replated at great expense or fabricated anew. These tasks demand not only technical skill, but also a devotion to accuracy. The restored car must look authoritative, yet every detail reveals the war against decay fought in the workshop. Context digest: the role of craftsmanship. Because the Gaz 18 Zim was hand-assembled, no two examples are exactly alike. This irregularity complicates restoration. Parts that fit one vehicle may not fit another without adjustment. Modern restorers find themselves essentially becoming artisans, blending metalwork, upholstery, and mechanics into a single craft. Unlike restoring a mass-produced sedan, bringing a Zim back requires interpreting the original builder's intent while correcting inconsistencies. Each completed car becomes both a faithful reproduction and a unique creation in its own right. Microstory: the debate of authenticity. Restorers face a fundamental question. Should the GAZ 18 Zim be preserved with all its original flaws, or should it be refined to meet the expectations of modern reliability? Some argue that the car's historical value lies in its imperfections, its rough edges that reflect the realities of 1950s production. Others insist that without updates, the car is nearly undrivable and therefore irrelevant to today's enthusiasts. Each restoration project becomes a personal manifesto, a statement about what preserving history really means. Context digest: costs beyond money. Restoring a Zim is not just financially draining, but emotionally demanding. The time required can stretch into years, with countless setbacks along the way. Paint jobs must be redone, engines rebuilt multiple times, and elusive parts fabricated at great cost. Yet those who persist often describe the process as addictive. Each hurdle overcome deepens their connection to the vehicle and to the history it represents. The restoration journey is as much about personal resilience as it is about technical accomplishment. Reflection bridge. To rebuild the GAZ 18 Zim is to wrestle with history, to decide how much of the past to preserve and how much to reinvent. This struggle in the workshop sets the stage for a larger question. Once revived, what role does the Zim play in the modern world? Microstory: a restored car on parade. When a fully restored GAZ 18 Zim rolls into a car show, it draws a unique kind of attention. Spectators marvel not only at its imposing size and vintage design, but at the improbability of its survival. Many have never seen one before, and for them, the car is less a classic automobile and more a moving museum piece. The owner, meanwhile, often becomes a curator, fielding endless questions about its origin, restoration, and meaning. Each public appearance reinforces the car's transition from forgotten relic to celebrated artifact. Context digest: symbolism revisited. In its own time, the GAZ 18 Zim represented state power and exclusivity. Today, however, its restored form symbolizes endurance, passion, and historical curiosity. It no longer commands authority in the political sense, but it commands respect as a survivor. Collectors see it as a conversation starter, historians view it as a tangible link to the Cold War era, and enthusiasts appreciate it as a triumph of craftsmanship. In the modern context, its power lies not in who rides inside, but in the story it carries. Reflection bridge: from scarcity of parts to public fascination. The restoration of the GAZ 18 Zim illustrates how forgotten machines can reclaim relevance. Yet the final layer of its story lies beyond mechanics and symbolism, the legacy it leaves behind for future generations. The 1953 GAZ 18 Zim reaches its most profound significance when we look at what happens after the restoration is complete, when the machine is no longer just a car, but a vessel of meaning for those who encounter it today. The sedan that once symbolized exclusivity in political theater now takes on a very different role in the modern world. A cultural artifact, a teaching tool, and a reminder of how luxury and power were interpreted in an environment defined by scarcity and ambition. What was once accessible only to the few has now become a window for the many. A chance to experience history not through textbooks, but through sheet metal and upholstery that carry the weight of an era. Understanding its present role helps us see why saving such a car matters more than ever. Microstory: a bridge between generations. When younger enthusiasts come across a restored GAZ 18 Zim at an event, their reactions are often a mix of awe and curiosity. They didn't grow up seeing these cars on the streets, so the sight feels otherworldly. Owners find themselves explaining not just how the car was restored, but what it represented in its own time. In this way, the Zim becomes more than just a collector's trophy. It becomes a storytelling device, capable of connecting generations that otherwise might share little in common. Microstory: preserving memory through motion. Museums can preserve a Zim behind glass, but when one is driven, even carefully, it comes alive in ways static exhibits cannot. The sound of its engine, the size of its presence on the road, the way it towers over modern traffic, all of these elements offer visceral proof of what the past looked and felt like. Each outing on public roads becomes an act of living history, reminding bystanders that the world once held a different definition of prestige. This ability to animate memory gives the restored car a resonance few artifacts can match. Context, digest. From relic to blueprint. In today's automotive culture, the GAZ 18 Zim provides an unusual kind of inspiration. It doesn't set performance records or influence modern design directly, but it demonstrates how vehicles can be both flawed and significant at the same time. It challenges the assumption that only technical excellence ensures legacy, showing instead that symbolism and cultural weight can secure a place in history. For modern builders and enthusiasts, the lesson is clear. Every car tells a story, even those imperfectly made. Microstory: ownership in today's market. Owning a restored GAZ 18 Zim in the present day is both rewarding and demanding. The cars are rare enough that they attract immediate attention, but maintaining them requires constant vigilance. Specialized mechanics are scarce, replacement parts still need to be fabricated, and the vehicles themselves are cumbersome in everyday traffic. Yet, owners often describe a deep pride in their stewardship, knowing they are safeguarding a piece of history too fragile to survive without human care. Their role extends beyond ownership. They are custodians of memory, context digest, lessons for preservation. The Zim highlights a broader truth about restoration. Saving rare vehicles isn't just about keeping machines alive, it's about keeping stories accessible. Without active preservation, history risks being flattened into generalizations. Each restored example serves as proof that history is layered, complicated, and best understood through tangible artifacts. This awareness influences not only collectors of Soviet-era cars, but the global preservation community, reminding all of us why even imperfect machines deserve attention. Reflection bridge. The GAZ 18 Zim demonstrates how cars can transcend function to become symbols of history, culture, and continuity. But its greatest impact lies in what it shows us about legacy, what we choose to preserve, and why. Microstory: a legacy on display. Imagine a restored Zim parked under the lights at an international car show. For most attendees, it's their first encounter with such a vehicle. They walk around it, surprised by its size, intrigued by its details, and compelled to learn about its origins. The car sparks conversations not only about automotive design, but about the political and cultural climates that shaped it. In that moment, the Zim proves its lasting power. It's no longer about prestige in its own era, but about sparking dialogue in ours. Context digest: why it still matters. Long after its production ended, the GAZ 18 Zim continues to hold meaning because it forces us to examine the intersection of ambition, symbolism, and craftsmanship. It represents a world that no longer exists, but one whose lessons still echo. For enthusiasts, historians, and casual observers alike, the car demonstrates that preservation isn't about perfection, it's about memory. By saving a Zim, we preserve the story of an era that sought to project strength through machinery. And in doing so, we reflect on our own era's definitions of power and prestige. Reflection bridge. The GAZ 18 Zim, once an elite tool of image making, is now a tool of remembrance, ensuring that history rides forward instead of fading away. As we move to conclude, we can see how this sedan's unlikely journey offers both caution and inspiration for the automotive world at large. The 1953 GAZ 18 Zim stands today as both a rare collector's item and a cultural touchstone, reminding us that cars are never just machines, but reflections of the societies that create them. For US viewers, the appeal of the Zim is layered. It is exotic in its scarcity, intriguing in its contradictions, and instructive in how prestige was built under conditions vastly different from those faced by Western manufacturers. To own or even encounter one is to step into a parallel narrative of automotive history, one where luxury was defined not by consumer markets, but by political needs and symbolism. The GAZ 18 Zim, within the first 30 words of this closing reflection, becomes more than just an old car. It becomes a preserved chapter of global history. Owning one in the United States would not be a simple matter. These sedans are heavy, difficult to maneuver, and reliant on parts that must often be fabricated by hand. Maintenance is costly, and driving one requires patience and dedication. Yet that difficulty is also part of the appeal. In an automotive landscape filled with mass-produced classics, the Zim stands apart as a challenge worth taking on. It is not a car you buy for convenience, but one you inherit as a responsibility. To keep one alive is to accept a role as caretaker for an artifact that cannot survive without passionate stewardship. For enthusiasts, the market angle is just as fascinating. Because so few exist, prices for restored examples can vary widely, driven more by historical value than by conventional performance or brand prestige. Collectors who pursue one are often less concerned with speed or comfort and more captivated by the narrative. They are investing in a story, a symbol, and a rarity unlikely to appear at every auction or car show. That scarcity, combined with the immense effort needed to restore one, ensures that values will remain strong for the foreseeable future, especially as interest in Cold War history continues to grow. Culturally, the Gaz 18 Zim leaves a lasting blueprint. It challenges us to reconsider what makes a car iconic. Was it the engineering? The exclusivity? The symbolism? In truth, it was all of these combined, wrapped in a body that embodied both ambition and imperfection. For restorers and historians, its lesson is simple. Even flawed creations can leave an indelible mark if they capture the spirit of their time. For casual observers, the takeaway is equally powerful. Luxury doesn't always emerge from abundance. Sometimes it emerges from determination to project an image, no matter the cost. And that is why the Gaz 18 Zim deserves to be remembered. It is a reminder that cars are not just mechanical objects, but cultural artifacts, capable of carrying stories far beyond their original purpose. In preserving and restoring one, we preserve a vision of a world that sought to impress, to project, and to endure. The final truth is this: the Zim may have started life as a tool of authority, but its ultimate legacy is as a bridge between past and present, a symbol of how history can live on through the roar of an engine and the gleam of chrome.